Welcome to This Week in Local, a Locology podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Locology analysts Mike Bolin and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, senior analyst at Locology, joined by my co-host, Mike Bolin, also a senior analyst at Locology. Mike, how's it going?
Hey, Charlie. Doing well.
Great. Why don't we hear a little bit about what you're working on this week?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Over the last week, we saw two big tech events, sort of from the big tech world, one from Google, one from Microsoft. And as you can imagine, they have focused a lot on sort of their AI integrations. And, you know, we're writing articles on Locology Insider on both of them. But in the interest of time, I'll focus just today on sort of Google's updates. So its event was called Marketing Live. And it's interesting because this just comes a few weeks after Google I/O, which is its big annual developer conference, which similarly was like an AI fest. But this one zeroed in on specifically Google like search ad products, how search is done, their sort of orientation around what they're providing to advertisers, what ads are going to look like to users, all that good stuff. And as you can imagine, like I said, very sort of AI infused. So just to go through like a few of the highlights. So one of the things I thought was interesting was they're now doing what I'm calling generative search results, which is essentially search results that are less static than there were before. Like you see search results and they're very deliberately presented to users. So for example, there's like the meta description, which is sort of the, the summary words you see in a given search result. There's the title, there's sometimes an image. And Google for a while has left it to site publishers and webmasters to essentially apply some of the, SEO playbooks to, write that copy, or you can actually leave it blank and they will automatically just sort of pull copy that goes there. But even in those automated sort of situations, those sort of search results were always static in that, you see them several times based on several different search queries. Whenever they show up, they sort of look the same. Now they're actually changing on a search by search basis. So the actual search result, again, the meta description, the title, in some cases the image, are going to sort of shift around dynamically based on the search query itself. So I might search for something, you might search for something, we're using different words, the same page shows up, but the search results are going to look different for each of us. And the thought is that better serves the user to give them a result, or actually the result itself, the rankings don't change, just the actual how it looks changes, that better just sort of complies with the question or the search sort of keywords you used. And the way they're doing it, as you might imagine, is through the power of generative AI and conversational AI to sort of like on a search by search basis on the fly, look at a given page and reshuffle things, again, based on the search query. So just the words that they're putting forward might be something that's buried at the bottom of a page, but more directly results to the search that I did. So it's all done just very quickly and on the fly. And that's sort of a new development from Google that's interesting. Related to that, they're doing some stuff on the back end where paid search advertisers can now have a more streamlined process of sort of creating their campaigns, where they essentially just have to say, this is the page I want to send traffic to. And Google will automatically do a lot of this sort of selecting the best keywords and writing the best meta copy and all that kind of stuff. So essentially they're getting at, sort of incentivizing more search marketing behavior by just making it a lot easier and using the power of AI to sort of automate that process of campaign creation. A lot of other things along those lines. I'll just mention a few of them really quickly. There's a new thing they've launched called Product Studio, which is similar to the item I just mentioned in that they're using AI to help generate sort of elements of page search campaigns. In this case, it's images. So using generative AI, you can sort of make product images that have like, a different background, like scratch that, I want a green leafy background, and it'll automatically do that. So it's just for some of those like product e-commerce, Google shopping types of contexts to have sharper images and more images. Google's hoping that if they lower these sort of barriers to production, people will have more images. They've reported that if any campaign has more than one image associated with it, it actually boosts impressions by 76% and click-through rates by 32%. So they're just sort of, the theme you can tell is just using AI. Then the last one I'll mention is sort of like Microsoft has started to do with Chat GPT in Bing. They're starting to experiment with how they monetize that. So they're integrating ads along with those chatbot results sort of at the top and the bottom. And I think that's a move towards, a lot of people are, like we did at the recent E23 conference, asking, they're shifting everything around, this classic sort of SERP model that they've had forever, where all their ad inventory comes from. What are they going to do when it's just, all these sort of direct answers and chatbots? And I think they're sort of feeling around, and this represents one thing in that direction with, their traditional ads, how they're going to fit them in this sort of, still very highly intent driven type of exchange. Instead of a search query and then a search page, it's sort of taking new forms, and they're sort of feeling that out, how they maintain their monetization in that new world. So a lot more there, a lot of the questions of why, but I'll pause there for your reactions, Charlie.
Okay, so a couple things. One, what you just said about sort of improving the ad buying process, for like, if that's what you meant.
Yep.
The first thing that pops into my head, I always think of, who's going to suffer? Maybe
Yeah.
is that a potential threat to agencies who do that on behalf of small businesses?
Yeah, that's a great observation. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, one of the sort of value adds that agencies have is that, one, will do the legwork for you, but number two, will apply some of the intelligence of like coming up with the best keywords, coming up with like all of those elements that, now they're sort of doing on the back end in an automated way. So I think that, I mean, I guess that does sort of disintermediate,
because we've been waiting for that for a long time. It feels like that, it's sooner or later, all this stuff is going to be automated to the extent that anybody can do it. Right. And are we near that day?
Yeah. And Google, if you think about it, might have a native advantage in knowing what works on its own system and its own sort of page rank driven algorithms of like, how to help pages get there, more than a third-party agency might. But a third-party agency, I don't want to sort of slam them too much, because the sort of experience,
speculative really at this point.
Yeah, but the experience they have in what works, especially in sort of nuanced verticals or categories or things like that, I think there's still a significant value add that they'll have. But this gets a little bit closer to disintermediation.
Right. Well, I think the full automation of this is sort of an inevitability that we've sort of been waiting for. This feels like a step further in that direction. Now, going quickly back to the SERP thing, are users going to notice a huge difference in how it looks and feels, or is it all just sort of more in the results themselves, or in actually the presentation of the results to the consumer?
That's a good question. Insofar as this announcement is concerned, the actual rankings won't change. I mean, the rankings is always a moving target, but just isolating this particular move, let's say the rankings are the same. They're just going to look different in terms of what the headline says and then what the meta description says. Okay. Now, from a user perspective, they might not know the difference unless they do sort of like a few tests and a few, like, open an incognito window and do like one search and do another.
But the average user is not going to be, oh my God,
they're not going to know the difference.
Yeah.
But they will probably see that the search results and at least the copy that they are presented with on the search page is a little bit more fine-tuned to the exact keywords they use when they did their search.
Okay. Super interesting stuff. And I, just sort of underscore, and the horse of AI isn't dead, but we're still beating it relentlessly. And, but it's still super fascinating to see how it's changing so many things.
Yeah. One final point there.
Yeah.
This is yet another thing where, I don't know if you remember, about a month and a half ago, everyone was giving Google a lot of grief for being sort of late to the AI
We did on
party.
this podcast, by the way.
Yeah. But no, I think if you remember, our thought at the time was, pump the brakes. Hold on. Google is going to be just fine. They are better positioned for AI than anyone in terms of just like the knowledge graph that they have of images and text and all these things, which ends up being the perfect sort of AI training set. And I think that, they have a lot of places, and they've been working on AI forever in a lot of different ways, Assistant and Tensor and Transformer and all these sort of projects. So one, they're going to be just fine. Two, they're going to figure it out in terms of, like, as I mentioned, they're feeling their way out about like where they're going to monetize. And I think it's just going to end up being integrated in a million different places. So that's going to be just on one level, like the ads they're serving, the way the search results are configured, but also, like I mentioned, like on the back end, they're now using AI to make it more streamlined for advertisers to just make it easier on them. So I think it's just gonna continue seeping in like 1,000 ways.
Well, I think AI had been in the background at Google for quite some time.
Oh yeah,
before all of the that we know that. I think the point we kind of dinged them just a little bit, and it was mostly me, as I recall, was when they weren't they weren't rushing out a Chat GPT version,
the current
of their own
flavor of AI that everyone's talking about, which is those open AI driven things like generative AI with artwork and conversational AI with like ChatGPT. Yes, for those particular things, they were a little bit late.
And but, the reason was they didn't want to come out with something half baked and have a bunch of mistakes on their shoulders.
But they ended up doing that by rushing out Bard, and then they had to pull that back. But
Right. But anyway, that was the conversation at the time, which seems like a million years ago. It was maybe weeks ago, maybe a couple of months at most. Anyway, let's just shift gears a little bit, just slight shift of gears. I got a couple quick things I want to bring up. First one, very quickly, Neeva, a company, actually, I don't want to give myself much credit, but I remember hearing about it on a podcast I'm adherent of, which is anything Scott Galloway does. He was I think I might have been there or somewhere I heard about this thing Neeva percolating. So we wrote about it fairly early in its development. And Neeva is something that I think it was 2021, don't hold my feet too close to the fire on this, came out with this thing that basically was a subscription-based ad-free search engine started by a gentleman who used to run Google Ads, whose name is not in front of me, and I'm not going to fumble for it. And what happened was he decided that the world needed a search engine that was ad-free, privacy, better on privacy, and subscription-based. And they came out with this thing, Neeva. It wasn't a bad product, okay? But they just announced it's shutting down as of June 2nd. So if you go to Neeva right now, go to their website, they'll say we're shutting down June 2nd. No celebration here, but it just didn't work. The Google killer itself died, And what they said the reason wasn't so much that they couldn't sell subscriptions, but they couldn't get anyone to try Neeva, even just give it a try to see if it's a better experience. And I think that's interesting. It says a lot about ingrained behavior and how hard it is to dislodge that. It's like trying to say, we've got something that's better than the iPhone. Just try it for free for a week, or better than the smartphone, I should say. And maybe that would work, but I think their biggest barrier, if that were to be the case, would be to get people to try it to see if they like it better. And I think it's just a lesson in, maybe the reason you think the big guy is so vulnerable is not the reason that you're going to fail. It's it's something else. And I think this was not what they anticipated would be their biggest problem. I don't think. And it was, and it just killed them. So that's one thing that I wrote about the demise of Neeva. And there were some big names back in it. Reid Hoffman, Scott Galloway again, but more Sequoia and I forgot the other big one that poured, and the founders themselves who made a lot of money from Google and YouTube. There's a lot of money went into this thing and it's all gone. Now the business says they're going to continue. They've done a lot of AI work. They included like LLM functionality in the search experience very early on. They're actually ahead of Google on that. But it didn't move the needle for them at all. So they're gone. RIP. Another data point about how hard it is. My lead in the article I wrote is quoting The Wire, and it makes it sound like I've seen every episode of The Wire. I've only seen clips on YouTube. But the Omar line, if you're going to go after the king, you best not miss.
Classic.
Yeah. So there's that. And then the other thing I just finished writing about is an update on WeWork. which was you and I think have both written about WeWork. I wrote about it quite a bit a couple of years back around the whole IPO. It was just a lot of fun kind of following that what show. And I was a WeWork fan. I was a WeWork user at one point. And I never thought it was a bad product. It was just the grandiosity behind, Adam Neumann and his whole, we're going to change the world with rented desks in loft buildings in New York was always ridiculous. The idea that there would be demand for a nice co-working facility was never ridiculous. Okay. But they just took it too far, way too far, and burned billions and billions of dollars. Well, the company still exists. He got a new CEO around the time of the IPO when Adam was told to go do something, go surf somewhere or whatever. And this gentleman came in, ran from the real estate background, ran the business. He's now resigning. The company went public as a SPAC. I think in 2021, the stock is down almost as far as it can go. And it's really tanked hard over the last year. And, but what's kind of interesting underneath that, there's an announcement today that showed that there maybe is a glimmer of hope or opportunity for WeWork to continue. And it's something that we pointed out a couple of years ago when we wrote about it. I think it was April 2021. We wrote, okay, post-COVID, everyone's going to be hybrid or remote, but there's going to be people who will, as a perk, want maybe an office, someplace to go to get the hell out of the house, and maybe WeWork becomes a corporate perk or something like that. And now they seem to have leaned into that enterprise opportunity sort of. And just today we saw that Amazon in London, there's a WeWork facility in London recently refurbished that Amazon's going to lease 70,000 square feet from and put 1,000 people in. And Boston Consulting Group did something recently along those lines in Durham, North Carolina, Raleigh, Durham. And, I think there's movement in that direction for WeWork, which was sort of the opportunity we thought they had when they sort of emerged from the IPO. And, they went in SPAC, the sort of the lower form of going public that's now kind of dead. And that as a public company, you can't exactly point to them as a big success story, but this Amazon announcement today suggests to me that there's still an opportunity for WeWork to have a business going forward. Yeah. At any rate, that one kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, and I think this is smart if they want to reinvent themselves. I think they should also rebrand just based on all the brand baggage that WeWork has. And
that's a good thought.
WeWork, yeah, and WeWork never was really inherently a bad business or a bad idea. I think obviously, they just sort of tried to fly too close to the sun, which is they got greedy with the valuation and their S1 filing. And not only that, but they were spending like a company that was that large, and they were enabled to do so just from all the sort of money that they got from SoftBank. And, that we all know what happened there. And so I think that, a smaller version of that is just managed well, spends in a prudent way, and operates like a real estate company, not a, elevate the world's consciousness company.
Not a yoga business.
There still could actually be a business there. And again, they should rebrand.
No, I think the rebranding is a great thought. And I think when you fly too close to the sun, expensive tequila just explodes in your hands. So, I mean, I think the grandiosity of WeWork in its sort of peak WeWork, peak Adam Neumann period, turned people off so hard that I think people are just kind of unwilling to see that there still may be an opportunity for this business. And I think the rebrand is such a good thought. I'm a little surprised they haven't done it, to be honest, now that you mention it. I'm like, why haven't they? Why didn't, under the previous CEO who was brought in from the real estate industry to kind of clean up, bring some adult supervision in, you would have thought that would have been one of the first things that go on the whiteboard.
The board should be.
Yeah, that should be a board led. Yeah, like the board. They've brought in a member from, and I'm not mentioning any names because I don't have them in front of me, and I hate reading names and getting them wrong. So they brought in a member of the board to kind of do an interim thing. Probably he won't make any big decisions while they do a search, but I would hope under new leadership that would be probably one of the things. I mean, for their sake, I would hope. I don't really care.
Mhm.
For their sake, I would hope that that would be one of the things that is high on the list, is just a total redo of the brand, total reevaluation. What does our brand mean now versus what it meant, when Jared Leto was getting the role of Adam Newman. And I mean, I think after that, it should have been a no-brainer, really.
Yeah.
But I would expect that, actually, now that we've talked about it. I didn't put it in my piece. I think I'm going to go back and edit it and saying, and they should rebrand, says Mike Boland. It was our idea. And, 2 years later when they do it, they did it because we said so.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, so it's interesting that this thing still has a pulse. And I think what it says is the underlying business, even though it was a real estate business, not a transformation of our consciousness business. If you see it for what it is, it's still, it potentially is a good business.
Yeah,
Having
big enterprise deals,
Yeah.
like, instead of like these very fragmented, like freelance writers paying you $30 per week or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
No, I
Yeah.
think, I think that this Amazon deal, I don't know
Yeah.
how many more of these there are out there, but when you look at, I mean, this kind of ties together so many things we've been talking about recently with, this remote tech space that's emerging that we talk about, with Rome and others, Weight Room and others, Read AI, et cetera, who, I think we've kind of thrown out the idea that some of these companies should merge. But is there an intersection, with this whole co-working space? Because, Howard Lerman's principle of distributed work, which we both like as a concept, as a organizing principle for what this new reality of work is, which is not remote, not hybrid, not all in the office, not all at home, whatever. It's this sort of amalgam of all of those things for any, as Howard puts it, scaled organization, which I agree with. There is no scaled organization that doesn't have a lot of all of that. And WeWork seeing this as its opportunity, as its wedge in to Amazon.
Yeah, the B2B play. I mean, this is something that WeWork is inherently very balance sheet friendly to any large Fortune 500, as opposed to the traditional model of committing to either a lease or owning that building. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, for that reason alone. I mean, let's say you're a big company, Amazon obviously saw this for 1,000 people. I think what they're seeing it, and it also ties in, I think, the other conversation we had, was it last time, a couple episodes ago, talking about, converting offices into residences, I don't think WeWork will get into that business, but underlying that was sort of this, commercial real estate mess that we're in. And I think, so companies look at this, look at the leverage they have in the commercial real estate market. And they look at, what they don't want to do is return to the mistakes of the past of doing these long-term leases, kind of like what you're just saying. And this is, it's right for the moment. I think with the right leadership, could lean hard into this and do pretty well, I think. We'll end it there. Mike, why don't you read us out?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at locology.com. Please subscribe, like, and comment. So I'm Mike Boland with Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Locology's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.